So I saw this article the other day. It's entitled "South Korean Police Apologize Over Botched Serial Killer Case." And I thought, what the fuck? Like, that is a terrifying string of words. So I was a little bit interested, obviously, in what's actually happened here. So I did a little bit of digging. This case actually pertains to what they call the Korean Zodiac. So it's actually regarding a string of murders that took place in Hwaesong, um, in South Korea from the years of 1986 to 1991. The people of Hwaesong were just terrified. There was this killer on the loose. The police had no bloody idea. It's a rural town as well, like they're sort of not used to this sort of thing happening. And it was also sort of a landmark case in South Korea, being the first of which there was a string of murders with like a notable modus operandi. Specifically, the killer's MO was that he would target girls and women. So we had an age range of like 14 to 71 years old. They would be walking in secluded areas and he would then gag, rape, and strangle them with their own clothes. So like a few of the victims were found with like their tights, like their stockings strangled around their necks. One of them had their girdle over their head, like really just gross stuff, obviously. And there was actually a really, really good movie made about this one. I watched it yesterday. It's called Memories of Murder, and it was directed by Bong Joon-Ho, a name which may actually be familiar to you. He also directed that film Parasite. It's a really, really good film, and I recommend you watch it. I watched it on double speed. I really struggle with movies with subtitles because I sort of scan ahead and read like the subtitle text too fast, and I'm waiting for the person to catch up with what they're saying. And anyway, I watched it in record speed. That movie was actually inspired by the Hwaesong murders, and it was made in 2003, which I think the timing's a little bit interesting. You may sort of understand why as we get into this one. Anyway, what I was saying was that there was an MO that was present for this murder. In the movie, they went into a little more detail for this MO, saying that the killer only striked on rainy days, and I think victims who wore red were also targeted. They would also request that a certain song be played over the radio, and then he would strike. I can't find any information that actually substantiates this. However, when I was looking at a list of the victims, they would actually note the weather on that day. So I'm not entirely sure whether the rainy day thing was an actual thing. Who knows? Anyway, like I was saying, the people of the town were, terrified. All these innocent girls were going missing, just going about their daily lives. Like, they'd be returning home from meeting with someone. One of them died bringing an umbrella to her husband. And so the police are really starting to feel the pressure from the public to put an end to all of this, and they wanted to resume life as per usual. So the police are actually able to release a composite sketch. Now, this is based on witness description of the killer. And you can see here that there's actually a picture of the killer's hands. I can't read Korean, but I would assume that they're describing it here as soft hands. One of the victims said that the killer had very soft hands, which is like not notable. I mean, a lot of people would have been farm workers or factory workers, so to have soft hands is not nothing. Anyway, there wasn't heaps of luck in finding the killer. They investigated over 20,000 people and no luck. But in September of 1988, a middle school girl was found murdered while sleeping in her room. Now, obviously, police were desperate to catch the killer, as this victim was actually the youngest that had been found so far at the age of 14. So naturally, there would have been a bit of a public outcry about this. And I think the film really captured this sort of loss of public trust in the police. I think there was a scene in the movie where there was like a TV on, and the news presenter was saying something like, the detectives should be ashamed of themselves. One of the detectives gets up from where he's sitting and like changes the channel. I think they were feeling quite exasperated at this point. But nevertheless, they did actually arrest someone for this crime. His name is Yoon. That's his family name. His full name is out there. South Korea does this thing where they don't actually name the full names of any suspects or criminals to allow for them to live a normal life. I'll just continue to say his surname because I'll just butcher. I'm already butchering every Korean name I come across, so we'll call him Yun. They arrested him for this. However, they believed he wasn't responsible for the other crimes. He thought this crime with this girl was just a copycat crime. The evidence was a pubic hair sample found on the victim, which was said to be similar to Yun's. Keyword being similar, not a match. Which to that, what can I say? I guess they were desperate. The police really said, yep, close enough is good enough. And it's worth noting that out of all the suspects for this crime, so for this particular one, I think they had about 3,000 suspects. Yun was the only one that underwent this testing. So, it sounds like to me they've already formulated in their heads who they're going to charge. They're just trying to, I guess, collect evidence around this narrative. And, as aforementioned, I guess this comes down to pressure from the public, but also probably a bit of confirmation bias mixed in there. Like, the police really had made up their mind that he was a killer, or at least that he should be responsible for this crime, and sort of just flouted the negative pubic hair match. To have two pubic hair samples that are similar is, knowing whatever. But they actually managed to indict him on a confession that he committed the crime. And I'm sure you'll know that confessions are not always true or indicative of the real feelings of the confessor. Um, and Yun later stated that his false confession was born of police torture. And it is also worth noting, I think, that four other suspects of the Hwee-sung murders actually committed suicide during the 90s because of, police torture, allegedly. But they were, well, let's just say they committed suicide while they were being investigated. I think that's fair. And let's not also forget that the police are actually able to lie to you and tell you that they have proof that you've committed the crime. Now, I don't have the details on the, torture or the interrogation of Yun, but I could imagine that he would have been told that the pubic hair test came back as a match. Moreover, on that, I'd imagine the police, employed other tactics throughout their interrogation. They would do things like deprive you of sleep or not allowing you to sit, and even things just as long hours of questioning, you sort of get worn down. And as humans, when we're deprived of sleep, our brains just really start working a little bit kooky. And it happens. It's not uncommon. I think I read a statistic not too long ago that 1/3, might have been 1/4, I'll figure that out, of exonerations of people through the Innocence Project, they were actually convicted on a false confession through police coercion. So it's by no means uncommon. So at the age of 23, Yun was sentenced to life in prison, and he actually served 19 and a half years before he was released on parole in 2009. So just remember that film actually came out in 2003. So I think it was sort of being speculated that they had the wrong guy. As I mentioned earlier, police have now admitted that they had the wrong guy. The right guy is Lee, again, that's his surname, who is actually already serving life in Busan prison for a gross crime. I'll get into it in a second. Now, he was actually in prison even before this for breaking and entering into a house in Suwon. So in February 1990, he was arrested and sentenced to 1 year and 6 months in prison for robbery and violence. Now, this sentence was actually reduced to 2 years of probation, and he was released the following April. Now, in December of 93, his wife left him, and in Jan of 94, he invited his sister-in-law and proceeded to drug, rape, and kill her. Now, he hid her body, and he and his father-in-law started looking for her and actually reported this as an abduction to the police. Now, they did find her body, which I think should have raised some suspicion, considering that her head was covered with a plastic bag and some jeans, and her hands were tied with torn underwear, and the rest of her was covered with items such as stockings and bag straps. So that's not super dissimilar to the other crimes in which, the girls were gagged and bound by their own clothing items. Now, Lee was arrested in that same month because he kept asking, "How many years do you serve in prison for rape and murder?" Which,
go to jail.
however, he still stated that he had no involvement. But the court went ahead and just overturned that because they believed he was lying to avoid police brutality. So he was convicted and sentenced to death in May. However, in 95, the Supreme Court reviewed the case and sentenced him to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Now, in September of last year, Lee was identified as a suspect of the Hui Sung murders. They actually used modern forensic technology to match the DNA from the underwear of one of the victims to his own, and subsequent evidence actually linked him to 4 more of the 10 killings in Huesong. So on October 2, the police announced that he indeed confessed to murdering 15 victims. Some of these murders are unconfirmed, and over 30 rapes and attempted rapes. Now, through interviewing, people are saying that he has psychopathic tendencies. They say he's sexually frustrated. And the profilers said that he was unapologetic and smug. You know how psychopaths go, there's no guilt or remorse. They really don't believe they've done anything wrong. But in September of 2019, someone from the Gyeonggi Nambu province, I'm so sorry, someone from the police actually made a statement to the AFP, and he stated, "I express my deep condolences to the victims and their families, as well as the Korean public, for not having been able to solve this case for a long time." Uh, and shortly after, on the 10th of October, the Korea Herald actually published an article. This one's entitled, "Police Say Innocent Man May Have Been Jailed for 1980s Hwaesung Murder." So the keyword being may here. They weren't too keen on, I guess, admitting their fault here. However, in November, they announced that Lee was indeed responsible for the Hwaesong murders. However, due to the expiration of the statute of limitations in 2006, so that was for the most recent of the victims, he actually cannot be charged with any of these crimes, which is frustrating. But at the time of the murder, the statute of limitations was set at 15 years. Now they've actually gone ahead and increased it to 25 years. But unfortunately, you can't backdate this. Like, they can't retroactively apply it, which is, again, frustrating, but good for the future, I suppose. But yeah, essentially, Lee cannot be charged with any of these crimes, so it's no skin off his teeth to confess. I don't know whether that would have any impact on whether he'd be granted parole, after the 20 years for his life sentence. Like I said, they can't use this evidence, but I mean, it's a corrupt system. And also the police, involved in the torture and coercion. I mean, I hope they are reprimanded somehow, but they can't formally be charged with anything. But as for Yoon, he was actually granted a retrial. Now, the outcome of this is still unknown, but he did say he'll feel better after having his innocence established and with an apology from the police. He said, "I feel so frustrated about those long years. If the police who interrogated me made an apology, I'd feel better." He continued, "More than owing me an apology, I think the police owe an apology to the people of South Korea. Can you imagine how many people could have been treated unfairly or wrongfully accused by police in the past years?" Which I think is a very fair statement to make. What's more, they really didn't do much of a service to the public by letting a serial killer continue to be free, who indeed raped and killed another woman after the Hwaesong murders ended. As for the apology to himself, I think the police kind of skirted around that. An article was published on the 2nd of July in which a police officer, representative, who cares, said, "I bow my head down and offer apologies to the victims of Lee Chun-jae's crimes, the surviving families, and everyone who suffered damage due to the police investigation, including Mr. Yoon." Like, does that not feel a little bit tacked on in the end there? Like, oh, yeah, also him. um, However, if Yoon is found innocent, he's actually entitled to 1.7 billion won, which equates to about 2 million Australian and 1.4 million US, which is like not bad. But you have to remember, he went into jail when he was 22, served 19 and a half years, had the stigma for all those years too. I'm interested to know, like, how he feels about that. Like, I was actually having a chat with my mum the other day about this. This was unrelated, but we were chatting about the Innocence Project, and I was saying how I remember my first year of uni, we had a look at a case of Joe Jones. He actually served 7 years in prison. He was sentenced to life actually for the rape of a woman, which he did not commit. He was exonerated after 7 years through the use of DNA technology, which is absolutely fabulous. However, he lost 7 years of really formative, important years, I feel, of your life, 23 to 30. Um, but they went ahead and gave him $350,000, I guess, as sort of reparations. And I mean, $350,000 is a lot of money, but I don't know, like, I'm not sure how I feel about that. Like I don't know what my minimum dollar amount would be to be okay with that happening to myself. Like I feel like I would hold that with me for a long time, like a lot of anger and resentment. Um yeah, I'm not too sure if anyone knows what the minimum dollar amount would be. And it would also be different if you knew, okay, I just have to serve 7 years and then I'm getting out. This guy thought he'd be in prison for life. So I don't know. Let me know if you have a dollar amount. Now, essentially, that's the end of the story. Like I said, no one can be charged with these crimes, but maybe it's a little bit of closure for family members. Um, it's also important just to be historically accurate. Um, and I really, really hope that Yun is found innocent. I assume he would be. Um, and that's really the end.